This is Danielle again, and I am recording kind of a part 2 to my first video that went over how to do kind of the general formatting setup for your APA 7th edition paper in Word. I was using Word for Mac. I'm still using Word for Mac. And the goal for this video as kind of a part 2 is I'm going to be addressing the references page specifically. So I'm going to be looking at what I've got highlighted in blue here. My goals for this video is really to show you how to go about manually crafting citations for your references page, and not only the importance of how to do that and understanding how to do that, but also doing that in consideration of some of those APA 7th edition changes that are slightly different from the 6th edition. And I've got 4 different sources that I've chosen to model for you. I have a scholarly article that I found on ProQuest Central. I've got a newspaper article also from ProQuest, a New York Times article that's from the web, and another website source from an organization called the Battered Women's Justice Project. So like my first video, I'm using the same document, so I'm still pretending that I'm writing this paper on mitigating sexual assault in the military. Again, I wish I had a longer title, but anyway, so that's kind of the focus on this, so all of my sources have to do with that topic in some way. So this is what I did in my last video. I showed you what the new 7th edition APA cover page looks like, the abstract, how you bold your title where you start writing, and then when we get to the reference page. So I've already got a bunch of information on here, and this is really for me because when we do reference citation and the crafting of those citations, it's kind of a messy business, so I'm going to be kind of going back and forth, and you're going to be watching me go through the process. So it's a little bit of rough around the edges of a thing to record because it's really tedious. Once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. It's just getting used to it. And then as I'm doing this, I want to point out some things to be aware of as you are, once you get to your references page and you're putting your citations on there, just, calling your attention to specific things rather than, the basic information that you need for citation building. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the scholarly article. So I just went on to a very well-known library database on ProQuest, and I searched for an article on military and sexual assault. Those were my keywords, and I used the Boolean operator and I found this scholarly article, and I decided to use this as an example of how to cite this particular source. So now sometimes, usually scholarly articles will come with their own cover pages that have a lot of publication information. This one in particular does not, and so that's okay. What's nice about the cover pages on scholarly articles is that they give you a lot of the citation information that you need, but this one also has it. It's just in some slightly different areas, and that's not unusual. So because not scholarly articles, when they're uploaded to the internet and put into library databases, they don't all look the same. So when we talk about citation, and a lot of this information I'm pulling, just like I did last time, from the OWL at Purdue, the online writing lab, on their section on APA. So when it comes to scholarly articles, and some of this should hopefully sound familiar, and there's some kind of basic form, just kind of, what we do when we cite a scholarly article, right? So scholarly articles usually always have authors. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's more. The one I have in particular, I believe, has 14 authors, so it's a lot of authors, and there is a change in how we list authors in the 7th edition, so I'll get to that when I actually craft the citation for the scholarly source. So you always start with the author, and what I have, just to give you, before I go on, I've got things highlighted in green and yellow. The green, and again, these are from the OWL at Purdue, the green is a template or a formula is what we call it, and then the yellow is kind of what something might actually look like. So you can see that, you know, these are just all stand-ins for something like this where things actually are. So, right, it's always author followed by the date, and then the title of the article, and then the periodical title. So that's the name of the journal when we're talking about scholarly articles. A journal is something that is published periodically. Other examples of periodicals include newspapers and magazines, because these are things that aren't, say, like a book where they're published maybe one time. So these are things that are published on a regular basis, which is why they're called periodicals. So then you have the periodical table, which in this case would be the name of the journal that actually published the article. And I'm going to talk about sentence case and title case in just a minute when I actually do the citation. And then you have, so the periodical table, you always want to understand, you know, does this scholarly article have a volume, and then also an issue. So those two things you need to look for. And then the last thing really is looking at that DOI to see if it has a DOI. If the DOI has been assigned to the article, you need to include it after the page numbers. And this is in the event, which is usually the case, that your scholarly article has page numbers, then the DOI goes after that. And then if no DOI has been assigned, then you would use a URL. So you don't use both. So if it has a DOI, always use a DOI. If not, default to a URL from where you're getting that article. So one change about the DOI is that they're now asking that we format these like a URL. So before the DOI, you put the https:// followed by the DOI. Before, you didn't have that. What's also being taken, or is also a change from the 6th edition to the 7th edition, is we used to say retrieved from, and then you would give a URL if you had a URL. The retrieved from is gone, so that's no longer part of the citation. Everything else, for the most part, besides the authors, which I'll get to in a second, is the same. So I'm going to focus on this particular article, that scholarly article that I showed you, and I went ahead and I just pooled all of the, and I'm just going to cut that because I pulled all of the authors off of that source because there was a lot, so I wanted to kind of have that prepped before the video so you didn't have to watch me do that tedious work. But what I did, if we go back to looking at that particular source, is these are all of the authors, and they're listed first name, usually middle initial, last name, and then their credential. So in APA citations, we only use last names and then initials. And that's an APA standard because APA is generally used in the social sciences, and there's a belief that the APA has in terms of not giving full names to the authors because it could potentially lead to the reader having unconscious bias, or, if it's, maybe they have something against women authors, or, names that might sound like they have a particular national origin. And so so APA requests, right, last name and then the first two initials. If the middle initial is not given, you just give the first name initial. And that's due to try to decrease any bias the reader might have when they're reading a particular study. So what I did is I just copy and pasted this long list of 14 authors, and I dropped it in my Word doc. I'll make this a little bit bigger. And what I had to do was I had to modify it, so manually. So I first had to change it into the font that I wanted, the Times New Roman size 12, and then I had to get rid of those first names and also put, right, because it always goes last name, comma, and then initials. And so I did that up through, and then I also had to delete their credentials because those are not given in APA citations. And then before the last citation, there is the ampersand. So this is different from the 6th edition of APA because what they've done now is I think this is an improvement for APA. So it used to be, one author, how do you cite them? How do you cite two authors? How do you cite like 3 to 5? And then how do you cite, 6 or more? So something like that. So now they have 1 author, 2 authors, 3 to 20 authors, and then how do you cite more than 20? So they have made it a little bit easier. It's still a lot when you have like something like 14 authors. It's still a lot to put there because what the 6th edition called for is what is here. So in APA 6, the 6th edition, right, required listing the first 6 authors, and then you would put the et al., which you may have seen before, which is the and other, and others, excuse me. So now we list up, if you have more than 2, you list 3 through 20. If you have more than 20, then there's something else that you have to do, but I'm not going to talk about that because the probability of that happening is not often. Even having an article with 14 authors, I thought for me, is really not common. So you might have something like 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 at the most in social sciences, but that's about it. In the world I come from in humanities, we do only single authored writing. Very rarely will you even see something with 2 authors. So, but when you get into the sciences, you have more and more people who are writing at the same time collaboratively. So if I go back up to the crafting of this particular scholarly citation, I have here, right, and this is what it should look like. So I've done this part, right? I've listed all of my authors. Now I need the publication year. So if I go back to this particular scholarly article, I'm going to look for the year, and it's May 2017. Sometimes people ask, because certain things will give, very specific dates of when they were published. For example, like this one, which is one of my sources one of the newspaper sources, the December 5th, 2014, which makes sense because it's from the Wall Street Journal. Oftentimes it's said that it's always better to oversight than undercite. That's more so with in-text citations and with references, but when it comes to the date, you can put May 2017, but honestly, you really just need 2017. So that's the only thing that I would put there. And I'm just going to go ahead. I'm actually going to move this up under where I'm actually doing my scholarly article. Okay, So now I have the date that's followed by a period, and then I'm going to do the title. And I don't think I actually have pulled the title. So this is the title of that scholarly article. No, it's not. I'm kidding. Sorry, that's the title of something else. So what I'm going to do is copying and pasting is fine, especially when you have long things like that long list of authors and this longer title. But what happens is you're going to have to do formatting, right? So I've dropped that in there. Now I'm going to have to make sure that it's Times New Roman, that it's size 12, and also that the color is the color that I want it to be. The other thing about copying and pasting titles is that we don't care what the title looks like in its actual publication form. All APA titles in your citations on your references page go in that what we call the sentence case. So the sentence case means that you capitalize the first word, you capitalize any proper nouns, and I'm just going to write this. See, now my font is large, so let me just change that really quickly. I told you these types of videos can be a little bit more rough around the edges. Right, sentence case, you capitalize the first word, proper nouns, any word, or I should just say the first word after a colon, and that's it. That's all that gets capitalized in sentence case. So even though I copied and pasted this, I'm going to have to modify it to meet APA guidelines. I've left the first word capitalized. None of these are proper nouns, so I'm lowercasing them. There's no colon in this there are no colons in this title, so if there were a colon, which is not unusual to have in a scholarly article title, the word after that colon, even if it were the, right, it would be capitalized. I'm going to leave U.S. Army capitalized because that is a proper noun. And then we're going to put a period after that. So after that, we're going to put the name of the journal. And the name of the journal is AJPH, and I say I forgot what that was, and I actually did this. I forgot what it was, and I didn't feel like going back onto ProQuest, so I just Googled it, and I found it, and I dropped it in here somewhere. It's the American Journal of Public Health, so I'm just going to pull that. And when you have the thing about adding the names of journals is that you don't, like, even though this is AJPH on here, you don't put AJPH in your citation, because unless that's just what they go by, so like I went to their website and they don't go by just their acronym, right? They go by their full journal title name. So you have to respect the title of the journal. So, and the thing about journal titles is they get italicized, which a lot of people forget to do. So we're going to italicize that. The other thing that gets italicized, so what comes next, right, is we're going to do the volume number. We're going to check to see if there's an issue number, and then we're going to figure out the page range, and then we're going to check to see if a DOI is available for this particular article. And then once that's all done, we'll do the hanging indentation, and then that will be the completed citation for the scholarly source. So first we're going to check to see about that volume and issue. And in order to find this, and this isn't unusual, I had to scroll to the bottom of the first page, which gives additional publication information. It also says peer-reviewed here, which means I searched in ProQuest Central for peer-reviewed sources, and so it's telling me again that it's peer-reviewed, which means that it's a scholarly article, and gives the acronym of the journal here. It says the date, volume 107, number 5. So we know that the volume is 107 and the number 5 is the issue. So we have both a volume and an issue for this scholarly journal. The weird thing about APA is that everything gets italicized. So what gets italicized is from the beginning of the name of the journal to the volume. So that's all italicized. But there is a comma there and a space, and then the volume number is 107, and then we're going to unitalicize, and I believe the issue number was 5. Yes, I'm just going to double check that. And so the parentheses don't get italicized, so you just have to be careful about that. And then we're going to put a comma because we want to check to see what the page range is. So this is the first page. I see that it starts on page 732, and if I go to the very end, it goes from page 732 to page 739. So 732 to 739. And then we're going to put a period there. Now we're going to double check on the DOI. I actually believe this does have, so this is a normal thing that happens when you have to double check. So I'm going to go back into my browser because I believe I have it open in my browser. This is it here. So in the browser, so it's not on the actual PDF document that I downloaded, right? So I said full text and then I went to download it like that. But here you can see there is a DOI. And it also gives you some of that information here, right, in ProQuest. It doesn't list all of the authors because ProQuest Central has not updated for the APA 7th edition yet. So I'm going to copy this DOI. And remember that additional change is that, such as like down here, we have to now add the DOI as if it's a URL. I don't understand the reasoning behind that. That's just how it is. I'm going to pop that in. Obviously, I have to change the font. Actually, it looks like it changed. I'm just going to grab the whole thing to change the font. This is normal when you copy and paste because you have to then manually. Copy and pasting seems so easy, but then you have to do so much manual work to make sure that everything is exactly how you want it to be. I am going to lowercase DOI because that's how everything is shown to me in examples. And I actually just forgot what that was. I'm going to lowercase c, so that's AJPH. Okay. And then there's no punctuation after that. So that's all the information for that particular citation. So now I don't have it double spaced and I don't have it the hanging indentation done. I'm actually going to wait to do that until I've got all of my sources, all the information crafted for them, and then I'll go ahead and do like the alphabetization, the double spacing, and the hanging indentations. So we've done the scholarly article. We're now going to do the ProQuest Wall Street article. So if I go back to ProQuest, I also found this Wall Street article, and I wanted to use this because something that can get confusing, and if I can just double check it, is, see, this is what happens when you put too much information in. Okay. All right, here we go. So now I just want to look at the newspaper article. So this again is the formula or the template of a newspaper article. The Wall Street Journal, yeah, that kind of fits into that. I think it is a newspaper. There was a doubt in my mind for 2 seconds that it was a magazine, and I was like, it's not a magazine. Okay, so the thing about the newspaper article is that sometimes they have a site name and sometimes they don't. So this has to do with the site names. So I'm actually going to drop this down to its own page so it's easier to look at. So this is for a different citation, but this is important because if the author and the site name are the same, you omit the site name from the citation. So that's important because a lot of people, when they cite websites or something along those lines, they would put the title, but they wouldn't put the site name, but the site name would be different. So you do need to be aware of, what the site name is and add it if it's different. And it often is. So, but going back to that Wall Street newspaper article, that is actually the title here that I copy and pasted. So I'm just going to bump it up where I am making my citations. And I copy and pasted it. Again, I have to manually change it. It's not the color I want. It's not unusual for me to see different color fonts in student papers, and that's because we do. It's not that copying and pasting is a bad practice. It's that you have to kind of go in afterwards and make it look pretty, and make sure that it's following the guidelines. So everything should be the same, the same font color. So again, just like I talked about in my first video, it's all about consistency. So we have the title. If we look at that actual source, so first we want to know if it actually has an author, and it does. So the author is here. It's Schwartz Felicia, but remember in APA we don't spell out the first full name. So I'm going to write and that would be the author, and then I'm going to need the year. I believe this was published in 2014. Since it is a newspaper, I am going to go ahead and put the full day, since it's a newspaper. This is also, just for a quick tangent, I did, because I wanted to show this. It's not unusual when you're in databases like this to have these kind of cite buttons. These are what we call citation engines. And I used to be very aggressive about my philosophy in using citation engines and saying don't ever use them. I've lightened up a little bit on that because I think it's okay to use them. The most important thing, though, about using things like citation engines, where you say, please cite this, is that you're able to look at the citation and understand, is it correct? Do I need to modify something? So, and this is, right, they give the 6th edition. And it is correct for the 6th edition. But when I would copy and paste it in, right, this is what it looks like. So I would need to change the font, the color, the double spacing, and make sure it has a hanging indentation. So it's okay to use citation engines. It's just that you have to have the know-how. And that's why, to be able to look at what a citation engine spits out at you to be able to look at it and say, this is correct, this is not correct, or I'm not sure about this, I need to double check. So that's why having the know-how of how to craft citations manually and then understanding what they look like when they're spit out by citation engines, you don't just want to be dependent on automation. First and foremost, because that's just not conducive to the learning process. And then you will never be confident in your ability to craft a bibliography. So I did put that in there, but this is a 6th edition version, so it's still got that retrieved from in there. So that's no longer in the 7th edition. They do away with that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put that date in, and I'm just going to keep it like they have it. But I'm going to do it like that. I don't need the 0. And then I'm going to have to change this to be the sentence case. Now this is a semicolon. It's not a colon. So that word after that does not get capitalized. So I'm talking about sentence case. The reason we call it sentence case is for those reasons that I already gave, which is we only capitalize the first word, proper nouns, and a word after a colon, which honestly isn't what you would do if you were writing a sentence. It's just an APA rule. The opposite to that is what we call title case. So, and I think I have that, yeah. So the name of the journal is in what we call title case. So if we look at like what we did here, right, American Journal of Public Health, those aren't, altogether this is a proper noun. But the other thing, for example, that goes in title case is your title. And title case means that things like prepositions and articles. So in is a preposition and the is an article. Those are parts of speech. Those don't get capitalized. So that's the difference between title case and sentence case. So there are times when we use them and times when we don't use them. So I've got the author, I have the year, I have my title in sentence case, and now we're going to put that Wall Street Journal in title case. And I am going to, because if we go here, that's how they have it, right? Wall Street Journal, parentheses, online. One thing that APA has done, and they didn't really have this in the past, just mostly more in book sources, is places. This is actually something that the MLA did. They did away with having to identify location of publication unless it's an obscure publisher or an obscure location or a place that's not like London or New York or Chicago or, something like that. So same thing here. You don't have to worry about actual locations ever. And then I'm going to go down back to my newspaper article where we have title of article, title of publication, right? So that was that title that I turned into sentence case. And here you can see, right, it's year, comma, month, date, which is how we have it. The title of the publication was the Wall Street Online, and then we're going to give that URL. So even though I grabbed it from my citation, I'm just going to grab it myself and drop it in because I'm all about manual crafting of citations because I am super picky. And just to double check, there is a period before the URL and then there's no more punctuation. So after Wall Street Online, As you can see, they don't have that here. So that's another thing that's wrong with that particular citation. And then I'm going to put that there. It's Times New Roman. And yes, it's going to look funky. Some people don't change their font colors of their websites. I actually don't know what people prefer. I've never had anyone tell me otherwise. I always make it the same color and take away the blue and the underline. If you accidentally click it, it will permanently be purple, so I have had to retype out many URLs in when I'm doing my own bibliographies. Okay, so those are the first two sources. The next one we're going to do is a New York Times article that I found online. And it's here. It's, again, about military sexual assault. So I just found this online. I didn't find this through a library database. So the first two sources I did, the scholarly article and the Wall Street Journal online, are both from ProQuest Central, the library database. The final two sources that I'm going to do are both just web sources, so they're electronic sources. But this is still a newspaper source. But it's a newspaper source where, you know, it's not just like this. This is what we call an HTML source. It's different than, say, if you had an image, a scanned image of something that was actually printed in a newspaper, where it would have a page number and there might be a volume or number attributed to the newspaper. It's not uncommon these days for newspapers to publish articles that don't have page numbers, that aren't part of particular editions or particular, in particular volumes or editions of newspapers. So this is also an HTML source, which is why we don't have any page numbers associated with this versus this and the other newspaper source versus the scholarly article source, which, as you can see, was printed in a print source first, and it has what we call pagination. And anytime something has pagination, it means that it has page numbers, like actual page numbers, that it was printed in a hard copy paper journal, and then it was uploaded later online and then made available in these databases to people who want to look at it, who don't subscribe or pay for this journal. So in citing this one, we're going to... And yeah, I already pulled the title, so I'm going to bump that up. There. Now I just grabbed that. I did change it into the Times New Roman. My spacing is all messed up. I'll worry about that in a second. I did bump that up. So the first thing I'm going to check for is who the author is of this source. And this particular source does have an author. Now, when you look at articles like this, this is from the New York Times, so it's from a more well-established newspaper periodical. There are a lot of periodicals that don't necessarily have what we call these bylines. So when you don't have an author, you default to the title. So you would be alphabetizing by this is unacceptable, rather than by Phillips D. So I'm just going to double check the spelling of his name. It has one L and two P's. So that's how his name would look in APA, and it was May 2nd, 2019. So we know that in APA for newspapers, it's the year, the month, and I think I said 27th. I'll double check that. Nope, May 2nd. I'm adding numbers. May 2nd, 2019. Just a quick tangent about some of the years of the articles that I've chosen. You can tell that I've chosen a 2017, a 2014, a 2019 article, and that's because in the sources that you're choosing for your work, you do want to be choosing more recent research, particularly in a topic like sexual assault in the military. That's information that's going to be changing constantly. So there's some fields and areas where information is changing more rapidly than in other areas. So in something like sexual assault, this is something that, there might be something different constantly. We might have new numbers. We might have people, trying to pass different legislation. We might have, different, so it's just one of those topics that is constantly transforming. And so it would be, you would be expected to have that more recent research. And usually more recent research is considered, for this topic, I would say last 5 years. So I'm stretching it with this 2014. I even kind of cringed a little when I chose it because I was like, ooh, it's a little old for this particular topic, but it's okay. I was like, it's 6 years. So usually we say 5 to 10 years for recent research, but again, I think it's really dependent upon the topic. So that's just a slight tangent. So then we're going to do the title. And again, I just copied that. Now, the New York Times uses a different writing style. They don't use APA. So they have single quotations there, but the single quotations are actually incorrect. It actually would be double quotations, and I'm going to change them. So, because single quotations are actually British, and double quotations are American. Now, this is a quotation, but we're still going to modify it. It feels very wrong to do this sometimes. Now that's a period. It's not a colon, but it's a full stop. So I am going to keep that next word capitalized while I lowercase these other ones. Okay. It feels so wrong to change things. And I have a lot of experience with APA, but I'm mostly an MLA user, and we do things a little bit differently. It's a little bit more stricter, and I prefer that sometimes. So it feels uncomfortable to change things. We change things as well, but we don't use sentence case. I don't like sentence case personally. Okay, so we've got the. We have the name of the title, and so the next thing that we're going to do, I'm just going to double check. Now this, I'm not citing as a newspaper. I probably should have started with that. So, well, it can be a newspaper. It can be a newspaper or a web page. They're not, the formulae for the online newspaper article is not substantially different from the formulae for citing what used to be called a page on a website, which is what I still call it. So right, we still have last name, initials, a year, month, date, the title of page. The only difference here is that the title is italicized and the site name is given and the site name is not given. So I'm going to actually keep it. I'm glad I had that little conversation with myself because I'm going to keep it as it is. So, because this is a Washington Post example that then has the URL, so that's what I'm going to do. And the title of the publication, just like the journal title that would go in title case rather than sentence case, it's the same thing. So just like we did Wall Street Online in title case, we're going to do the same thing with, and it's the New York Times. Some people sometimes forget that. Just like with the Ohio State University, there is a the before it. And you can always double check that by going to the bottom and looking for copyright information, which says 2020, the New York Times Company. Used to have to give publication information, but not anymore. Now we're just going to say the New York Times, and we're going to italicize that. It used to be much more complicated, so I'm actually glad that they've changed that. And then there's going to be a period, and then we're just going to give the URL. So very similar to what we did with the Wall Street online source. I'm going to unitalicize that. I'm going to add that URL. No retrieved from. Again, you don't have to do this. This is just something that I'm really picky about in my own work. Okay, so those are the first 3 sources, which I believe are correct. The last one I'm doing, sorry, I know I've got a lot of text on here, is I'm going to do so when we talk about authors, right, we're used to having authors, but and just like I said before, if you don't have an author, you default to the title. However, there is an exception where if the resource was written by a group or organization, you use the group or organization as the author. So that's important because, and they give and when I say they, I mean the OWL at Purdue. They give the example for the ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So that means that there's no particular author attributed to writing this particular piece, but it's put out by the organization. So, so even though there's a title, in this case, even though there's not an author, you wouldn't default to the title, you would default to the organization who is responsible for putting out that title. It's very different than, say, like the New York Times. I would never use the New York Times as an organization that's the author. So you would just use the title, and then the New York Times would be the publisher, right? Or who's responsible for putting out this information. So there is a distinction to be made there. So I found the Battered Women's Justice Project, which is an organization, and they have a variety of articles on their website about military sexual assault. And so I just chose one. I just chose military sexual assault. And as you can see, there's no particular author attributed. Sometimes, if you get lucky, not if you get lucky, but occasionally author attributions will come at the bottom. But there's not, because this writing is attributed to the organization. So that's where, someone in the organization is responsible for putting out content on their website about information. So in this case, the author is going to be the Battered Women's Justice Project. So if I go back to where my citations are in the process of being made, it's the Battered Women's Justice Project. And I actually want to grab this here because this is actually going to be, and it's very similar to what we've been doing, but this is an example of the author and the site name being the same. So the author is the organization, but the site name would also be the Battered I've already forgotten their name. Battered Women's Justice Project, right? That would be considered the site name and the author. So this is an example of when we wouldn't put a site name because those two things are the same. And APA is clear, right, that if the author and the site name are the same, you omit the site name from the citation. So here we would have what I just put. Now we want a year, month, date if there is one. So we'll check to see on this particular page if there's a year, month, date. I don't think there is because I've already looked through it. There's not. So in that case, what we do is we put, I hate that space. We put n.d. which just means no date. So there's no date for this particular article. Then we're going to go to the title. The title of this is just military sexual assault. It's the title, but we are going to put it in sentence case. And then have that period there. And just to double check, because I'm all about double checking. This is the group name right here because I'm looking at this formula. So, well, see, and I'm glad I double checked because here they have the title of page does get italicized. But you can see that they have it in sentence case. So I was right on the sentence case. So I just have to italicize that. We're leaving out the site name because that would be the name of the author in this case. And then we're going to have a period and then we're going to drop in that URL. So I just want to italicize this. I don't want my period to be italicized because I am not picky. We're not going to have the site name, and then we're going to drop in this URL here. And again, I'm going to modify my... Okay. So that is all of the information that I need from those 4 different sources. So the last thing I would want to do, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of get rid of that information because this would be my reference page. And remember, references in the 7th edition does get bold-faced. Is we want to work on spacing, alphabetizing, and those hanging indentations, which are really helpful. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to alphabetize. So this would actually go first. So I'm going to pop it up at the top. And then the next one would be this one. I kind of have them in backwards order here. There we go. So I'm going to P, Q, R, S. Yes, so R and S. So that is how they would be alphabetized. Now I'm going to make sure that my spacing is what I want it to be. So I'm going to go back and open up that paragraph dialog box. And I'm going to have it at double. And I actually forgot to show you this in the first video, even though I said that I was going to, is what happens when the before and after are not set at 0 and 0. So I will show you what that looks like. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you how to manually do hanging indentations. It's how I do them. I do everything manually in Word because I like to have control over the way everything looks and understand how it's formatted. So what we do here is you want to be aware of this little hourglass shaped looking thing up here. This controls your margins. So what you do is, what happens, and I don't want to turn that purple, which I think I just did, but nope, it didn't. Okay, good. Is you want to go, anytime you have a citation that bleeds over onto more than one line is when you have a hanging indentation. So all of my citations have that. So what you do is you put the cursor on the second line of the citation, and then you want to move that bottom part of the hourglass to the ½ inch mark. And then what you do is you go to the next citation, You back up and then you press enter, and that automatically formats it, and you just do that for each one, and that's it. And that gives you the hanging indentation. And yes, it changed this, so I'm going to change it back because I'm adamant. But that would be how you alphabetize, do the double spacing, and then I think manual formatting of hanging indentations is much easier because you have control over it. Once you bring in automation, or you say the citations functions in Word, which you should never ever do, you lose control, unless you're a computer whiz, you lose control over understanding how to format what is being automated. You kind of have less control, like I said, unless you're a computer, if you're really savvy at computers. So being able to do it manually has a lot of advantages because you can do whatever you want. Okay, so just to give you that thing I promised I said I would show you in my first video. So right now this is all beautiful hanging indentation and beautiful uniform spacing. When you want to change your spacing, you do have to select the spacing that you want to change. Now, normally my computer, it might not be everybody's computer, but it's not unusual for the spacing to be set at the after at 10. And so I'm going to keep it at double, but I'm going to have before 0 and after 10, and I'm going to say OK. And so what that tells Word, because remember the dialog boxes are we're engaging in a dialogue with Word, is that anytime I hit the Enter key, I want you to make this large of a space before the next line. So you can see where I hit the Enter key here, 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 and then it doesn't matter because that's the last one down there. But you can see where the text is not, I don't hit the Enter key, where it just runs into the next line. The spaces are smaller. And that's because I didn't hit the Enter key there. But I told Word when I hit the Enter key, I don't want the 0. I want it to be a little bit larger than the standard double spacing. So that made these spaces larger. So that means that I don't have uniform spacing. So just to go back to putting it the way I want, which is that pretty uniform spacing, you say OK, and now everything is uniform. Where I hit Enter, the spacing is the same as the spacing between the lines where Enter has not. I did not hit Enter. So that is, I know this is a really long video, but I did want to kind of show the nuts and bolts of really what it takes to crafting a citations and a variety of citations. So I didn't just want to do a scholarly source, so I chose a scholarly source, which had those 14 authors, and then also do 2 different newspaper articles, and then a website source published by an organization. So I know it's a lot of information, and I hope that I also tried to highlight some of the differences in the 7th edition when it comes to crafting those citations on the references page in the 7th edition versus the 6th edition. But my next video that I'm going to record is I'm actually going to focus on in-text citations, because that's there's just like there are changes to citations on the references page, there are some changes to in-text citations. And I will be continuing to use these same sources and the same topic for all of these videos that I'm recording. I hope this has been helpful, and thank you for watching.